Right now, as you watch this video, there is a synthetic chemical in your blood that did not exist in any human being 50 years ago. It is in your liver. It is in your kidneys. It is in the blood of your children. Statistically, it is in the blood of 97% of all humans alive on this planet, and most of them have no idea it is there. It is not there because of a natural disaster or even a terrible accident. It is there because two American corporations spent 50 years running their own internal studies, watching their own workers get sick, generating their own scientific evidence, and then making a calculated decision to tell nobody. By the time the world found out, this chemical had contaminated the drinking water of over 158 million Americans and had spread irreversibly into the blood of every human being on Earth. This is the story of PFAS, of DuPont, of 3M, and of the most successful corporate cover-up in modern history.
To understand how this happened, you need to understand what makes these chemicals so remarkable and so dangerous. PFAS stands for per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances. They are a family of roughly 12,000 synthetic chemicals, all built around one of the strongest molecular bonds in all of chemistry, the carbon-fluorine bond. That bond is so tough that nothing in nature can break it down. Not sunlight, not bacteria, not rain, not time, which is exactly why they earn their nickname, forever chemicals. The story starts in 1938 when a DuPont chemist accidentally discovered PTFE, a slippery, heat-resistant compound that would eventually become Teflon. Non-stick frying pans, waterproof hiking jackets, stain-resistant carpet fibers, aerospace components. PFAS became the miracle of the 20th century. By the 1950s, 3M had developed its own family of PFAS for a product called Scotchgard, the spray you used on your sofa to protect it from spills. These chemicals were genuinely useful, and they were everywhere. In the inner lining of your fast food packaging, in your cookware, in fire suppression foam deployed at military bases and airports around the world. In the 1970s, PFAS found their way into the food chain. By the 1980s, they were turning up in municipal water supplies, and the companies manufacturing them already knew exactly what was happening. They just chose not to say so.
Here is the timeline that was hidden from you. In 1950, 3M's own mice studies found that PFAS chemicals were toxic. In 1963, 63 years ago, 3M's own internal technical manual classified PFAS as hazardous. In 1975, 3M discovered something that should have triggered an immediate public health response. PFAS was accumulating in the blood of the general population. People who had never worked in a factory, people who had never knowingly used a PFAS product. The contamination was already systemic, and 3M said nothing. In 1977, 3M determined that PFAS, the main active compound in Scotchgard, was, and I am quoting their own internal documents, more toxic than anticipated. The following year, 1978, 3M scientists internally concluded that PFAS and PFOA should be regarded as toxic. In 1979, DuPont's own survey of workers at its Parkersburg, West Virginia plant revealed possible liver damage in employees. In 1981, both companies quietly reassigned their female factory workers after internal animal studies showed PFAS caused fetal eye damage. No announcement was made, no regulator was informed. In 1984, DuPont detected PFAS in the drinking water of Little Hocking, Ohio, a town directly downstream from its Parkersburg plant, and did not alert a single local authority. In 1989, 3M documented elevated cancer rates among workers with PFAS exposure. In 1992, DuPont confirmed the same pattern. In 1997, DuPont's own mortality study found heightened cancer among Parkersburg plant workers. 22 years after workers first showed signs of harm, DuPont was still manufacturing Teflon, still advertising it on television, while internally sitting on evidence that it was poisoning the people who made it. A 1999 internal report had one 3M scientist finally putting it into writing. PFAS, he wrote, was the most insidious pollutant since PCBs. PCBs are so toxic they have been banned globally since 1979. PFAS is still in products sold today.
The first crack in the wall came not from a regulator or a journalist. It came from a farmer in West Virginia who could not understand why his cows were dying. Earl Tennant owned a farm in Parkersburg, just downstream from DuPont's Teflon manufacturing plant. Starting in the late 1990s, his cattle began dying in grotesque ways: blackened teeth, enlarged organs, tumors visible through the skin. Over 190 cattle died. State veterinarians could not explain it.
The EPA said it was outside their jurisdiction. DuPont said their plant had nothing to do with it. Then, on October 9, 1998, Earl Tennant made a phone call to a corporate defense attorney named Rob Bilott, a lawyer who, until that moment, had spent his entire career defending chemical companies. Bilott requested DuPont's internal documents. He received boxes, thousands of pages. As he read through them, he found the records of every suppressed study, every buried test result, every internal memo where scientists had flagged catastrophic health risks and executives had chosen to override them. DuPont had known since 1984 that its plant was contaminating the local drinking water. It had known since at least 1992 that PFOA was likely carcinogenic in humans. Bilott filed a class action lawsuit representing 70,000 residents of the Mid-Ohio River Valley whose water supply had been poisoned for years without their knowledge. He won. After DuPont lost the first 3 individual trials for a combined $19.7 million, the company agreed in 2017 to settle the remaining cases for $671.7 million. What Bilott uncovered, though, was not just a local contamination story. It was the origin story of a global poisoning, because every plant, every factory, every fire department using PFAS-based foam was a new vector spreading these indestructible chemicals further into the water table, the soil, and the food chain.
So who exactly are the key players here, and what drove their decisions? 2 companies sit at the center of this, 3M and DuPont. 3M invented PFOS and PFOA and was the primary global supplier of these compounds for decades. Their Scotchgard line alone generated enormous revenue, and PFAS-based firefighting foams became standard at every major military base and commercial airport in the United States and across NATO countries, meaning the U.S. military itself became one of the largest vectors of PFAS contamination in the world. DuPont licensed the chemistry from 3M and used PFOA specifically to manufacture Teflon, turning it into one of the most recognizable consumer brands in history. By the time 3M finally voluntarily phased out PFOS production in 2000, under EPA pressure but not legal obligation, the chemical was already present in the blood of people on every inhabited continent. DuPont's long-term response was telling. In 2015, the company spun off its specialty chemicals division into a new entity called Chemours, conveniently distancing the DuPont brand from future liability. But the contamination did not end, because PFAS is not one chemical. It is a family of roughly 12,000 compounds. When PFOA and PFOS began attracting regulatory attention, manufacturers pivoted to newer PFAS variants, compounds known as Gen X and PBS, that were even less studied, even less regulated, and chemically just as persistent. The industry did not stop making forever chemicals. It simply changed which forever chemicals it was making.
Here is the part that barely makes headlines, and it is the part that should genuinely frighten you. PFAS contamination is not an American problem, it is a planetary one. Researchers have found PFAS in Arctic sea ice, in the blood of polar bears, in the organs of dolphins in the Mediterranean. In a landmark 2022 study, scientists tested rainwater samples collected across the globe, including in Antarctica, in the middle of the Tibetan Plateau, and over the open Pacific Ocean, hundreds of miles from the nearest human settlement, and found PFAS levels that exceeded safe drinking water guidelines virtually everywhere on Earth. Think about what that means. These chemicals evaporate, enter the upper atmosphere, travel thousands of miles on air currents, and fall back down as rain, contaminating landscapes that no factory has ever touched. The CDC found PFAS in the blood of 97% of all Americans tested, but studies in Europe, Asia, Africa, and Australia show the same result. There is no longer a pristine human population on Earth, no control group, no baseline. You cannot find a group of humans whose blood contains no PFAS because there is no such group. The contamination is universal. It got that way because for 50 years, 2 companies decided that the revenue generated by indestructible synthetic chemicals was worth more than informing the public, or the government, that those chemicals were accumulating in the blood of every living thing on Earth.
You might be thinking, okay, so there is a chemical in my blood that I cannot get rid of. How bad is that actually? Here is the current scientific consensus. PFAS suppresses the immune system. Multiple studies have found that PFAS reduces your body's response to vaccines, meaning that if you are vaccinated against a disease, PFAS circulating in your bloodstream right now may be blunting that protection. It is linked to elevated cholesterol and to thyroid disruption, which affects metabolism, energy, and mood. It causes developmental delays and behavioral changes in children exposed in utero. And then there is cancer. Multiple cancer types have been associated with PFAS exposure: kidney cancer, testicular cancer, prostate cancer, cancers of the digestive system, respiratory system, and endocrine system. A 2025 study published in the Journal of Exposure Science and Environmental Epidemiology, analyzing data from 22 cancer registries representing roughly half the U.S. population, estimated that between 4,626 and 6,864 cancer cases per year in the United States alone are directly attributable to PFAS in drinking water. That is cancer cases caused not by smoking, not by genetics, not by lifestyle, but by the water coming out of a tap. In April 2024, the EPA finally set a legal limit for PFOA and PFOS in drinking water at 4 parts per trillion, 4 molecules of PFAS for every 1 trillion water molecules. The fact that a threshold that infinitesimally small was necessary to protect human health tells you something profound about what these chemicals do at trace concentrations, and most American water utilities have until 2021 to actually comply with it. The legal reckoning eventually arrived, though not as swiftly or as completely as the scale of harm demanded. In 2023, 3M agreed to pay up to $12.5 billion to settle lawsuits over PFAS contamination of drinking water systems across the United States. In May 2025, New Jersey separately reached a proposed settlement with 3M for up to $450 million specifically for contamination at 3M's Chambers Works manufacturing facility. In August 2025, New Jersey reached a landmark $2 billion settlement with DuPont for decades of PFAS contamination at multiple sites across the state. These are large numbers, but spread across the 158 million Americans drinking contaminated water, the cleanup costs involved, and the lifetime health impacts on an entire generation of people, they are also arguably inadequate. And here is the political dimension that completes the picture. The same month that New Jersey finalized its 3M settlement, May 2025, the EPA announced it would extend compliance deadlines for PFAS drinking water standards from 2029 to 2031 and move to partially rescind regulations for several PFAS compounds beyond PFOA and PFOS, including Gen-X and the replacement chemical the industry pivoted to when the original compounds came under scrutiny. The industry that spent 50 years suppressing science to avoid regulation is now shaping the regulatory response to its own pollution. The companies are paying settlements, the standards are being softened, the chemicals are still being made. In 1999, a scientist at 3M sat at his desk and typed the words, "PFOS is the most insidious pollutant since PCB." He worked at one of the 2 companies that had collectively spent 50 years ensuring that nobody outside those walls would ever read that sentence. The chemicals he was describing were already in the blood of people who had never heard the word PFAS. They are still there today. They are in your blood right now. The question is no longer whether your body contains forever chemicals. It does. The question worth sitting with is this: if 2 corporations can contaminate the blood of every human being on Earth, suppress their own scientific evidence for half a century, and still be setting the pace of the regulatory response to their own pollution, what does accountability actually mean? And the next time a corporation discovers that one of its products is slowly poisoning the world, will we find out in 50 years or 5?